Hello and welcome to Unlapped, a special episode of Unlapped from Abu Dhabi. If you're watching online, you might wonder where on earth Laurence and I are. We're both back to our hotels. Laurence has got a flight to catch shortly. We've been at Yas Marina. Laurence, hello, by the way. We've just had a car journey back together, so it's kind of weird to to formally greet each other like that. We've obviously been at the Yas Marina circuit watching the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, where a new champion was crowned. Before we get to that, just wanted to say, remember, if you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video, leave a comment, and don't forget to leave a 5-star review for our new ESPN F1 channel. And if you're listening, please do hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. We always really appreciate it. Laurence, maybe not a 5-star quality race today, but certainly a race that was very, very memorable and very significant in the history of Formula One. A new world champion, Lando Norris. He did it his way, he said afterwards. He probably also did it the hard way, having to secure it with third position in what was a pretty nervy race, I've got to say. Straight out the gate, I'm just going to say, what did you make of his performance, his drive? There was a bit of jeopardy, a lot of tension. Wasn't the most thrilling race, as we said, but for him in that car, unbelievable tension and, a lot riding on it. What did you make of that as a drive to crown a new champion in Formula One?
Well, when it became very clear that Lando was really only going to do what he needed to do, that made me a little bit nervous because we've seen things go wrong so recently with McLaren, be it from the technical front with the plank wear in Vegas or the strategy in Qatar. And I just thought, especially when Charles Leclerc was all over the back of him early in the race, this could slip away from Lando still. So there was a little bit of jeopardy there, even though, like you say, it wasn't the most thrilling on-track action. But to be fair to Norris, and you said, he did it his way. The quote that he repeated, I think maybe 5 or 6 times in the press conference was, "I did this my way." And that meant a number of things. One of it, I think it did refer to tonight to some extent, that, he went out there, knew what he needed to do. McLaren had made a decision that they were going to split their strategies, make life difficult for Max, and he got the job done. So there was that side to it. But I think it was a much wider point as well, in that he started this season. A lot of people had doubts about him. He admitted he had a lot of doubts about himself, especially after those early rounds where Piastri picked up a lot of steam and Norris was really struggling just to get close to Piastri, or certainly consistently get close to Piastri in qualifying. And also that he admitted, and he said this right throughout the season, I'm not a driver that goes out and gets my elbows out and kind of, gets aggressive off the start. And, I will lose places off the start. And it's just part of something that I have to deal with and I have to cope with. And it seems like he's gone through a massive journey this year, taking those weaknesses, realizing those weaknesses, but then focusing not on all of them, because not all of them are fixable. And I think he realizes that. And, he's not pretending to be the most complete driver on the grid, but doing the bits he has to do right, making the most of his natural talent, which is unquestionably it's there, because we've seen it a number of races this year in space. And really focusing on getting the results when he needs them. And ultimately, that's what he did. And ultimately, that's why he's world champion. And right now, we could pick through the whole season and say, yeah, but if that didn't happen, he wouldn't have done it. Or if that didn't happen, he wouldn't have done it. Doesn't matter. The points stack up at the end of the year. Lando Norris is world champion. And I think, deservedly so. I think Max had a brilliant season. We'll talk about him in a bit, I'm sure. But Lando did what he needs to do when he needs to do it. And that included this evening in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there was an element of kind of the Nico Rosberg 2016 season about certainly this run-in with Lando in terms of, in 2016, Rosberg, I think at the time he kind of got derided for it, but really it was a very, very smart way of doing it. This is exactly what I need to do. He was going up in that case against Lewis Hamilton, Lando going up against Max Verstappen, and Rosberg was going up against the prime Lewis Hamilton, which I think we always forget. And he was like, here's my skill set, here's where I'm weak, let's lead into the skill set. Why would I go too much the other way? I would say that probably the one thing going into next season that is probably still an unanswered question with Norris is, how does he cope in wheel-to-wheel fights with Max Verstappen? I would say that's still the biggest area that we really haven't seen Norris prove himself. But to your point, that's not like a prerequisite for being world champion. It's not like you have to do that and then they say, here's the world championship trophy. But it is an interesting wrinkle going into next season for him. I thought as well, the good thing, I was worried that what we would get, and you're always worried with this when you get a world champion, is they do, if it's a bare minimum drive, it's a very kind of a drive lacking in any kind of memorable moments. I use Rosberg as an example. He obviously finished second that year. He won the championship in Abu Dhabi, but it came on that incredible moment when he was being backed up by Lewis into the crowd behind. It was a really memorable way to win it. I thought Lando at least provided a few really, pretty tense overtakes. There was the double overtake on the Aston and Lawson, which we both kind of realized at the same time, like, oh yeah, of course, that's a second Red Bull out there. It's another Red Bull car. Then he had to get past Yuki. Obviously, there was that kind of that brief moment that we thought maybe a penalty might be what we ended up talking about for the race. But I thought that those were moments that, yes, it's a quicker car against a midfield car, but you still have to make those moves work. And maybe a cynic would have said that, Lando Norris of 6 months ago might have made a bit of a pig's ear of some of those moves and, overexerted himself, maybe gone wide, maybe jeopardized his race a little bit. I think he managed it really well. He knew he had the car underneath him to do that. So I agree with you. I think it was a nice, a good way to kind of put the exclamation point on it. And I'm really fascinated now to see you always see, don't you, a leveling up. I mean, we obviously didn't see it from Rosberg because he retired straight after, but when a driver becomes a first-time world champion, you automatically see them level up the next season. That pressure's gone, that stress of winning the first time is gone. I'm really curious, especially given the way Lando is, how that will affect him and how that will make him different going into next season. So I thought it was great. I think all of us went into that paddock today thinking, especially with some PTSD from 2021, it was, let's make sure one of these guys wins it and it's just clean, it's fair, there's no controversy over a steward's decision, which is why I think we all kind of had alarm bells ringing when there was that penalty, because it was like, let's not make this the talking point. I thought it was great. And people listening to this might wonder why only one of us goes to the press conference afterwards. There's lots to do in the paddock, as you know, Laurence, afterwards, and we kind of split duties after. I actually had quite a nice time in the paddock talking to some of the drivers that know Lando very well. Alex Albon, Charles Leclerc. I actually missed George Russell's session, but his quotes about him were great. You actually got to see firsthand the men themselves. You saw all three. There was a press conference for Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri first, and then Lando Norris. What kind of mood was he in? Because both of us kind of observed, myself in Qatar and then us collectively this weekend, you could see the nerves in Norris over the past couple of weeks, and maybe something we're not used to seeing so much from Max Verstappen. What was he like post-race? Because I caught it briefly as I walked back into the media centre and it was on the big screen. Big beaming smile on his face. What was he like to talk as world champion? Because he still seemed to have the tears in his eyes when I saw him talking.
Yeah, he was a completely different person to the Lando Norris that I'd seen over the rest of the weekend in both the Thursday press conference and the post-qualifying press conference. All happened in the same room just down from the media centre. He was fidgeting when he wasn't being asked a question. Even when he was being asked a question, he was looking down, looking at his hands, just clearly didn't want to be there. Completely understandable. I mean, who wants to be talking to the press when you've got the pressures of a world title going on around you? But in the post-race one, it was just all of that weight had been lifted off his shoulders. And all of a sudden there was this beaming smile. As is tradition, the journalists applaud when he came in. Whoever the champion is, when they come in the press conference and do their own separate press conference, they get a round of applause from the journalists, because we do appreciate the hard work these guys put in throughout the season, and we do have some idea, not a full idea, but we have some idea of what it takes to be a champion. And so as he came in, he got this round of applause. I think even that, he just spent probably about an hour and a half being congratulated by everyone in the paddock, including the people that really mean something to him, and then all of a sudden, a bunch of journalists are clapping him, but it's still that, that meant something to him. And he came in with a glass of his energy drink, which is branded with his own kind of like helmet design all over the can. And he was putting that, and he actually had two. And I noticed he said to his press officer, "Oh yeah, that one." And one of our colleagues, Luke Smith, asked him later on, "Is there anything else in that can other than the energy drink?" And he was like, "Yeah, there's a lot in there." There's a lot in there.
And well deserved at that point. If you can't drink after winning a world championship, you're never going to find time.
So I don't know whether he was just pulling our leg or what. But anyway, he was just so keen to talk about it, and so keen, I think, to express what it meant to him. And the one thing which he said, and this, when you read it, it might just seem like the thing you have to say in these situations. But he said, "This isn't just for me, or this isn't really for me at all. It's for my family who sacrificed all this stuff along the way, and it's for the mechanics and for the engineers." And of course, you think come on, this is all about you. You're the world champion today. But you really got a sense with Lando that he absolutely meant that, and that it really was an emotional thing for him, because anyone watching the TV pictures would have seen his mum and dad there. And I think, to go all that way, and it doesn't really matter what your background is, how much money you have and all that kind of stuff, to get to this level in motor racing, you have to do a huge amount of sacrifices, and you have to work incredibly hard behind the scenes to get things done, both the parents and the driver themselves. And I think to have that all pay off, and he said to have something physical when he gets the trophy in later this week in Tashkent at the FIA Gala, to get that and to share that with his family was incredible for him. And so you could see there was a bit of emotion there. There was at one point of which he seemed to be still shaking a bit, and there was another point where he got incredibly cold, and I think basically his body had just almost shut down with some of its just primary functions, because there was so much excitement and adrenaline and happiness running through him. And you know what, I've sat in a number of those champions press conferences over the years, and it's always a fun thing to be involved with, but you always have this radiating joy from the driver, and really it was there with Lando, just on such a scale that it was fantastic to see. So I think a great champion. I think they all would have been. Any one of them had won it this year, they would have been a great champion and a deserving champion. But nice to have a new champion as well. So Max he also seemed fired up after that. So I think going forward we've got another contender, as long as McLaren continues to be competitive for titles going forward into the next regulation set.
Yeah, I agree. I think we were all, we talked in the lead into this, didn't we, about how captivated I think we definitely were by the Max Verstappen comeback story and everything he's done. And certainly, contrary to what people might think about the media, for us anyway, I can only speak about, we obviously, talk pretty much every race that we've ever covered together. There's been some form of communication. We kind of just want the best story and what's the best one to cover. And I agree with you. I think that going into that race, as we walked in today, there was a feeling of whoever gets this done, there's going to be something about it that's remarkable. And I think that actually thinking about it, as we sit here now, I'd rather have a fired up 4-time world champion Max Verstappen than maybe a 5-time world champion Max Verstappen, who's maybe, we already know this year they've kind of hinted at the fact that he maybe lost a bit of the love for Formula One, this year. Sometimes too many titles can do that. Winning becomes routine. You lose that fire. I think that having a fired up Verstappen next season will be fantastic. We know what Verstappen can do on a bad day, and what he can do on a good day is spectacular. So I think in terms of the competitiveness of the grid next season, that can't be a bad thing. That Verstappen's going to go away for this break now and really reflect on the fact that, let's face it, these guys don't like being beaten by anybody. And when you're the 4-time world champion, to finally give that championship over, I think it was something insane. I saw it's about 1,500 days since Verstappen wasn't the Formula One world champion. So it's a new reality, or an old reality for him to get used to again. So I think that's going to be great as well. And, I think that we always love a rivalry in Formula One. Maybe Norris and Verstappen is one that will continue into another season. I don't know. But I thought it was nice just on your point about how Lando was. I remember being in one of the Lewis ones where, even though he'd won, I think it must have been his 6th one, you can still see how much it means. And there's almost an air of disbelief about them. Just moments before they're crossing the line, Lando was saying, wasn't he, that he was shaking in the car kind of in the final kind of corners. And then suddenly they're just sat in front of us again, the same faces that have asked them all these questions for years. And I think part of it as well, Lando, and I mean, Max is very, somebody that goes back and forth with the media quite a bit as well. There must be such a degree of satisfaction sitting in front of faces that have written certain things about you, have asked you questions in the past about your mental temperament, your approach to racing. You're suddenly sat there and you're saying, well, you're now in a press conference with me as the World Drivers' Champion. I don't care who you are. That's got to be a good feeling. So I think that there's a degree of that with Lando as well today. Just speaking about press conferences and being fired up before, so people know how it went, we got the top 2 finishers. It usually would be the top 3 finishers, but Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri sat on their own, and then Lando had his own one after that. He was also in the TV pen for about what must have been about an hour, just answering every single question. Piastri and Verstappen were very, very different in their press conference, I think, to how Norris was. Obviously, there was a degree of disappointment for both of them. I thought Piastri handled that moment pretty well, I've got to be honest. That's, very, very difficult to sit there. His whole team is celebrating a drivers' championship. I think that I'll get to it in a minute, but I don't buy this idea that there's been favouritism massively in one way. I think he's come off worse maybe in the 50-50s. But I think he handled that pretty well, Piastri, and he was very self-reflective. What did you make? Again, you were in that session. What did you make of the way he dealt with those questions? And how do you think he will be against, just to keep this Lando theme a little bit there, how do you think he will be alongside Norris next season? Has this kind of made it a one-sided dynamic, do you think, going forward? Or do you think Piastri can kind of replicate this challenge against a new world champion in his teammate?
No, I think Oscar realizes how close he was to it. And the other thing you got to remember with Oscar is that he's in his third season in Formula One. And, while that is a certain amount of time, it's not the experience that Lando Norris and Max Verstappen had going into this season. So undoubtedly he'll look at bits that he wish had done differently, wish certain decisions had gone another way, and you can piece it together that way. But I think the one thing which we hear consistently about Oscar from the team is that he is incredibly intelligent and incredibly good at taking on lessons from the realities of Formula One, from the issues that face him during a race. And he's one of those guys, it's very rare that he makes the same mistake twice. And so I feel like Oscar Piastri is absolutely the champion of the future, given the right situation. I do actually wonder if the car is good again, whether he's got perhaps more ceiling to fill, and perhaps even a higher ceiling than Norris, to the point that if they went up again, then maybe he'd win it. Actually, I think you probably rerun this season again, and just small little things have gone a different way, and all of a sudden you have a different result. So I think he took it very well, and I think he has been great throughout this. There was a concern, I think, with McLaren that how would they deal with the driver that lost, because it's been such an intense fight between the two of them whilst remaining friendly. But it's been such an intense fight that it's going to be very difficult for one of the drivers to watch the whole team celebrating with the other. But actually, I think from what we saw of Oscar on Sunday night, his mood, and this is a real strength of his, was still relatively flat and kind of straightforward, and just looking at problems to be solved rather than letting the emotions wash over him. So I'm sure he'll have a moment over the next week where he'll be pretty upset with the way things have gone, but he will also come back from that even stronger. He's definitely good enough to win a championship.
100%. Yeah, no, I agree. I think more than anything this year, this made me a believer in the talent of Piastri. I know that it unraveled a bit as well, but I agree with you. I think there's enough mental strength there to come back stronger. What I will say that was a very standout quote from the Zach Brown session that I was at when this press conference was going on was Zach Brown said, he was asked about how they console Oscar through a moment like that, and he said, Oscar Piastri will be a world champion with McLaren. I know it. And I think that was, it's something that maybe, if it said, I'm sure Oscar Piastri will be a world champion, and then left it there, you might think, oh, well, maybe, I think McLaren, in Zach Brown's head, he wants there to be a situation next year where the two of them are going up against each other again. Whether people will believe that or not, I guess next year will prove how close that is to be. But I do think Piastri can win a championship, and we've heard it a lot from people at McLaren. The ceiling does seem to be higher with him, at least that's what people seem to think. So we'll see how that goes. Just lastly as well, Verstappen himself, I thought was very interesting in the press conference. He seemed maybe not disappointed, but I think there was a lot of emotion there that we don't often see with Max. There was maybe he seemed a bit more. He was very proud of the effort, but he did seem quite agitated, didn't he? Especially at one question, and the answer he gave, I think, was telling of the fact that this is the moment the season really did get away from him. Just explain quickly. We're going to wrap this up because it's meant to be a short podcast, but just explain quickly the moment with Max, and do you think said moment that you are about to explain did ultimately cost him?
Yeah, so I mean, just to reflect slightly on something you said before, Max did say that this is a season that he feels like he's performed at his best, and it's one
Which
that
I think most people would agree with as
that
well.
he's
Like
incredibly
he's
proud of.
been,
And
yeah,
just to be clear as well, he was asked about like mainly the good things about his season throughout the press conference, but there was one glaring question that was there. Having lost the championship by 2 points, how much does he regret the 9 points, I think it was, that he gave away in Spain by having an intentional collision with George Russell and getting a penalty for it. And it basically, had he not done that, he may well have been world champion. Now, I have a slight issue with that to start with as a premise, because had he got those points then, I feel like the rest of the season would inevitably go different.
yeah,
There would just be a different reality, because going into this race, the point situation would have been different. Therefore, McLaren would approach the race differently, and Norris would approach the race differently. He would take more risks. So it's not as simple as give him those points and all of a sudden he's world champion. But yeah, his reaction, he basically said, "You forget all the other stuff that I've done this season. You're only focusing on that one thing." He said, "I knew you'd talk about it." He commented on the journalist's stupid grin. I don't think it was a stupid grin. I think the journalist was then without the microphone and then able to answer to what Max had said. And then Max quite fairly pointed out that he'd benefited from mistakes from the other side, from the McLaren side. He said, "I had a lot of early Christmas presents in the second half of the season, and you can question those as well." And he's absolutely right, because really, regardless of what happened in Spain, Max was only in this title fight at the final race because of the mistakes the McLarens have made. By rights, in terms of by the amount of performance that McLaren car had, and by the maximum potential of those two McLaren drivers, had McLaren got it right, had those two drivers, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, got it right throughout the season, Max Verstappen just wouldn't have been in contention, because his car was not good enough earlier in the year. And it was something of a miracle that he was still there and that he managed to overhaul a points gap of 104 points to Oscar Piastri. Remember, that was after the Dutch Grand Prix, and that wasn't to Lando Norris at the time. That was to Oscar Piastri. So he finished ahead of Oscar Piastri by, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but I think it would have been about 11 points or 10 points. And he finished only 2 points behind Lando Norris after Lando, started to make the most of the McLaren in the final stages of the season up until Vegas, Qatar. And so I think that's what Max is probably thinking. Like, he's thinking, you're focused on one thing, but the fact I'm here, the fact I've got this far is, I'm very proud of it. Like, I should be recognized for it. Don't just focus on that one race, that one slip. And he also said, it's motor racing. And I think it is part of perhaps the Verstappen character that you can't have the aggression, most of which is incredibly controlled, and the brilliance and the speed and the desire and the way he goes hunting race victories, without, sometimes it just boiling over a little bit and him doing something stupid like he did in Spain, which, he said he regretted and all the rest of it afterwards. So an interesting moment, but as you alluded to, one that I don't think, that I think will stay with Max to some extent. I'm sure he won't be thinking about it, but it's unquestionably something that he got wrong and therefore lost some points. Like I said, can you then say that had he not done it, he would have been champion? Absolutely not, because I think you're then on a different version of reality going forward from that point, and all sorts of things could happen. Maybe he could have got in a similar situation further down. Maybe Lando, who knows? So, I think it was an interesting point in the press conference, and one that's worth raising. But I can kind of see why Max was not happy about the question being asked.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have to deal with the media for a few weeks now, which is true of all of them.
Well, he's going to Tashkent to the
That's
FIA
true,
Gala to pick up his second place award.
Yeah, which must also be another.
Have to face a few of us there again. Well, those that make the trip, I won't be there, but
no, not me. But that's a final blow of having to finish in the top three. You have to face the media again. Quick one. I'll answer this one first, and I'll throw it to you. I think a lot of people certainly people I know have texted me saying there's been different levels of reaction to Lando as champion. Some people saying maybe, is he in the same caliber as Verstappen? I think that's kind of harsh because we've seen Verstappen win 4. I think it's well agreed that Verstappen is a modern day great, and we're kind of living through that era of him. I'm not sure everybody's convinced about the strength of Lando Norris as a champion. Out of all the three of them, he was the one that I thought, I'm not sure how it's going to be with Lando being champion. There's still a lot of question marks there. Not everything got answered today, but I think that this is the best we've seen of Lando in this past kind of stretch down, these past kind of 2-3 months. Best we've seen of Lando, I think, in Formula One at any point. Did he convince you fully? I know that it doesn't matter because he is the world champion now, but are you fully convinced of Lando Norris champion? It can be a quick, brief answer if you want, but has he convinced you he is in that elite level with the likes of Verstappen and Hamilton going forward?
Yes, because first of all, to get to Formula One, I'm not sure we all quite realise how difficult it is and how good you have to be. I think that sometimes gets overlooked. Even to be in a car going around at the back of the grid for a couple of seasons, you have to be exceptional at what you do. So that's already a level. Now, of course, there is a level within that, and you have the true greats, and you have the drivers that maybe win one championship, the drivers that win multiple championships within those true greats, and then you have drivers who never win a championship. But Lando absolutely deserves to be in that. By his own admission, he said he's not the same driver as Max Verstappen. He said it's up to you guys to decide whether you think I'm as good as Max. He doesn't seem to care whether we do think that or not. And I think that's a lot. That says a lot about how he goes racing. He's his own man, as he said, as we started this podcast. He does it his own way, and all you can do as a driver in Formula One when you get the car that's good enough to win the championship is put the results together and do it. And in the same way that Nico Rosberg, I think, is a deserving world champion, I think absolutely Lando Norris is a deserving world champion. If you were to frame the question, will he win as many championships as Max Verstappen in his career? No, I don't think he will. But
I agree with that.
I don't think, even he was saying this might be the only one. I don't know, and that's not ever the impression you got with Max, because there's just, that level of just that extra level that he seems to be able to get to that other drivers can't. But yeah, should he be a world champion? Absolutely. If you can put together a season where you are consistent enough, competitive enough throughout the year against a very good teammate. This is another issue or another point which I think can easily be overlooked, is that a lot of drivers who go and win championships often don't have the strongest teammate, or it's very much a one-car team. I'm not saying that that's the only reason Max Verstappen's a 4-time world champion, but it does make a big difference if you have a genuinely very competitive driver within the same team, or a driver who is on your level within the same team, and to go and do it. That's another challenge on top. And then not only has he had that, he's then had to finish the season ahead of Max in what was a very tense final race and all the rest of it, and he got it done. So yeah, okay, is Lando Norris the best Formula One driver ever? I don't think so. I think there are drivers on the grid who are better. But is he a deserving world champion? Absolutely. And he may well prove me wrong on that first point as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Remains to be seen, as we said earlier. Laurence, thanks very much, mate, as always. And absolute pleasure. I think this is our 10th season covering Formula One together. Time does fly.
Yeah,
I think, but only the fourth world champion in that time. For me, anyway, it's the fourth world champion I've covered. Lewis, Rosberg, Verstappen, and now Norris. So a nice, career milestone as well, taking another one off. Always a pleasure, mate, and we'll be back, I'm sure, to unpick this season to talk about Formula One going forward. We're always here doing that, and please, as I said at the beginning, please don't forget to like or subscribe to our ESPN F1 YouTube channel, and if you're listening, please do hit us with a 5-star review. We really, really appreciate it, and yeah, as always, great fun talking Formula One with you and reviewing the season that we've had. Thanks very much.